Everyone, my name is Pastor Keion Henderson. I am privileged to give leadership to the Lighthouse Church, and welcome to another Tuesday with us in this marvelous month that we call Black History Month. And we've gotten a chance all month long to have riveting conversations and awesome dialogue with different personalities, because we as a people, we have so many hues and so many cultures and so much diversity just within the confines of our own culture. And we're excited today to have a very distinguished guest coming to us all the way from Austin, Texas, to spend a few moments with us. Now, I'm telling you that I could not read her bio to you even if I tried. To those of you all around the United States and all around the world who will see this, I am telling you we have a gem of a person in our midst. The bio is extensive, and so hopefully during our conversation, some of those layers will be unfolded. But today we want to continue our conversation as it relates to justice, and more specifically, social justice, and how this young lady that we're getting ready to talk to is a part of an organization that sees justice as one of its pillars. I have with me the president and CEO of Houston Tillotson University in Austin, Texas. She is to my right, but she is in your face. Dr. Burnett, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Pastor. The pleasure is mine.
It is my honor to have you here today, and I think our audience is getting ready to find out that there is no shortage of awesome black women doing great things in the world today. So since I cannot conceptualize, I almost quit working when I read your bio. I literally read your bio and I said to myself, I am doing nothing with my life. I do know you're from the Midwest. I have an uncle that lives in Cincinnati. I have two that live in Cleveland. And so we've got something going there. And I'm originally from Gary, Indiana, so I know you understand the Midwest vibe.
We're family. You're my tribe.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. You grew up as a little girl, and did you always know you could be anything you wanted to be? Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Just real quickly, I'm first generation, and I didn't know what that meant until I got into higher education. I was in a meeting one time, and they kept saying first generation, and I said, what does that mean? And someone said, that means you're the first in your family to go to college. Wow. And my parents, who I believe are the smartest people in the world, did not go to college. My dad is part of the migration from the south to the north. He migrated to Cleveland from Mississippi, and my mother grew up in Cleveland. And they met, got married, and had my sister and I. And when I think back on my childhood, and I've done a lot of reflection on that now, particularly in this work around social justice, I don't think that I had an opportunity to think of anything other than going to college. Like, it was the 13th grade. I didn't even know I had an option.
Oh, that's good.
My parents just instilled that in us from the very beginning, both my sister and I. And I went to Ohio State University and got an engineering degree. I don't know who filled out my FAFSA. I don't know. The truth of the story is that my uncle was dating my English teacher. Wow. And she took a special interest in me, white female, Miss Stimick. I don't remember yesterday, but I can remember certain people in my life. And she was dating my uncle, so she took a special interest in me, drove me to Ohio State, which now I know is new student orientation, so to speak. And I went to Ohio State, got an engineering degree, and I worked corporate for a while, and then I married a military officer who is a Morehouse graduate, so my husband went to an HBCU, and I used to go to his homecomings with him. And I was working at Procter & Gamble at the time. I worked at the Washington Post. I had a super corporate career. And I was the blue suit briefcase person. So I married this military officer in the Air Force, and we traveled the world as a part of his career. And I had some just exquisite opportunities. We lived in Turkey for a long time. And when I look back on that in hindsight, and I was sharing earlier, I truly believe that we're vessels, and God pours into us what we're to prepare us for what's coming next. We don't really get it all the time. So in our travels, when he decided that he was going to retire, I had to think about what I wanted to do with my own life. And I don't think I ever really wanted to be an engineer, but I was good in math. So when you're good in math in the 1970s, you're a female, you're black, everybody, you need to be an engineer. And one funny side story, when I told my grandfather that I was going to be he was watching the Cleveland Browns game. I told him, I'm going to Ohio State, Papa, and I'm going to be an engineer. He said, girl, why you want to drive a train? Because in my family, wow, that was not a thing in my family. And I'm from a really strong, supportive, wonderful family. So I did some soul searching what I wanted to do, and I wanted to be in education. I've always had this attraction to the power of education. I have a saying for it now that education is truly the great equalizer. I mean, it gives us opportunities, because if I stopped at high school, I wouldn't be having the honor of having this conversation with you in Houston, Texas. So I got into higher ed. I got a position at a community college as to teach. And eventually I got into administration, and the rest is history. I actually got my doctorate very late in life because I wanted a presidency, but I didn't have the credentials. And I wasn't qualified for my son said I had plenty of street cred in higher education, but I didn't have the certificate. So I went back to get my doctorate. I actually Googled, am I too old to get my doctorate? Half of the internet said, you're too old, forget it, keep going with your life, your career. The other half said, you're never too old, go for your dreams. So I went back and got my doctorate at the age of 55, actually. And I don't regret that at all, because I think I took it more seriously, and I learned more from it as a person, and I really was able to grasp the science of higher education. So my historically black college story, my husband being a Morehouse graduate, I used to go to his homecomings with him, and I would say, all these fine black people, educated, I could work somewhere like this. So watch what you pray for. I was like, God, I could work somewhere like this, because you will get it. So that's, my elevator speech, my life. I have 2 beautiful children. My daughter works in special events, PR, special events communications in Los Angeles, and my son is a journalist, and he works in Washington, D.C. And those are my greatest blessings. I say that a lot, the people who call me mom and mommy. They're my great, I actually always want to get weepy when I talk about them, because I'm very proud of the people that they've become.
Well, I'm sure that your parents are just as proud of you. The Ohio State. Shout out to all of the Buckeyes. A great university. Down through the years, historically awesome at football, Washington Post, just all of these things you name, and you just say them as if, that weekend I went there, and then we lived in Turkey, and then we bought a space shuttle, and then we went to the moon for the weekend. It sounds enormous, but for the young African-American girl growing up in that time, which is not far from now, but light years from now, because things are changing at such a rapid pace. From the time you grew up, having a father who sounded very traditional and very strong and protective, to now having a representation of yourself in the White House, in the vice presidency, did you know or have any sense at that time, just go back to 15, 18, was there any sense at that time that today would be possible?
None at all, but yes,
okay,
if that makes sense.
Okay.
I'm a child of the 60s. I grew up in the 60s. The soundtrack of my life is Motown. And I
grew up in the 80s, but that's my soundtrack too.
So many of our soundtrack, those songs, all the words.
Every word.
I grew up in an era in Cleveland, Ohio, in an all-black community. So I was really sheltered from the systemic racism as a child. And I look back at that now, and I really think about what my parents were up against and what they had to do to make sure that my sister and I had opportunities. And I appreciate that on such a deeper level than I ever did, because the more I encourage people to really know your history. Mm. And the more I read books like Caste and White Rage and The Warmth of the Other Suns, and I became to understand and know my own family and my own history, and it instills in you a sense of pride. So I think as a child, the sky was the limit for me because of the people that I was surrounded with and who strongly believed in me. And I think that's something that we lose as a culture of our young people, to really believe in them and make them feel like they could do anything they put their mind to, and to work really hard to remove all these barriers against their success. And that's why I'm president of Houston-Tillotson, because that's our mission. That's my job as the president, is to remove barriers to student success. That's my job.
I love it.
Sometimes that looks like a financial barrier. Sometimes it's a programmatic barrier. Sometimes it's, the color of their skin, the people, how people perceive the institution. All those things. That's my job, to remove those barriers.
When you said about earlier, when you were talking about going to college, and you said a young girl who was good at math back in, that was the first thing that came to my mind. It's almost as if you have a hidden figure story.
Because when I went to see the movie with my husband, who's a natural introvert, and we're in a movie theater, and I'm talking the whole movie. That happened to me. I understand that. Because it was like art was truly imitating life. Like there's the scene where Taraji Henson went into the big room of all the white engineers. That happened to me.
And figured that problem out just like that.
Right. That actually happened to me in a different scenario, because my husband was stationed in Georgia at the time. So here I come, this corporate I was coming from Procter & Gamble. I worked at Procter & Gamble, and I go to Georgia, and I have to get this job I have to get a job. And they had advertisements all over the base that they were looking for engineers. So I go and apply, and all of a sudden they weren't looking for engineers anymore. So because of affirmative action, they had to give me an interview. And the guy even asked me, was Ohio State accredited? And I was super offended by that, because Ohio State at that time was in the top 5 in the nation, but it was looking for any reason not to hire me. And it was Georgia, this is pretty deep South. And I had a real cultural experience, which I believe has prepared me for some of my life experiences in Austin. So when I saw the movie Hidden Figures, I felt bad that I had taken my journey for granted. Because when I got to Ohio State in 1975, the movie Hidden Figures was from the late 60s. So just less than 10 years before I walk on the campus of Ohio State University thinking they owe me something, I owed women who couldn't use the same bathrooms, who couldn't drink from the same coffee pot, just within 6 to 10 years. And that's really nothing. So, and they were all black college graduates. So they were all built to be warriors and to trailblaze for women like myself to come behind them and take many things for granted. So that's what we try to instill in our students. I'll take the word tryout. We instill in our students that you have to understand your history. It will build you up and gird you for any challenges that you come against. And that's really the magic of what happens at Black
College. I think you're onto something. And those of you all who are watching, I hope that there is somebody whose interest is sparked. And I hope that you're looking at Dr. Burnett and saying, I can do that too. She's the CEO and president of a university. You've heard places like Procter & Gamble. You've heard places like Wall Street Journal. You've heard military. You've heard that her story is etched and stitched in all of these pillars of power. And yet she sits here talking to you really as a representation to the fact that you can do it. I believe that education is the great equalizer. I think you said that earlier. We had a conversation earlier this month, and we were discussing justice. And I said something to the effect that until the educational system, and I mean all the way from general all the way up until higher, has some sort of attention to it, we'll always be in the deficit. For instance, my experience with education is I've never gotten an education degree as it relates to school. But I was a pastor in Fort Wayne, Indiana. There was a principal named Hal Stevens. His school was across the street from the little church that we started. It had 125 seats in it. That includes sitting on top of the baptistry, the choir stand, the drum seat, and the fold-out chairs that we purchased. It was on 1 acre of land. We had an $856 a month mortgage on that building. $40,000 was given to us by a young man who was the president of a bank who was a fan of us playing basketball. And that's how I got it. And he asked me to come on staff. And I said, I don't have a degree. He said, we can fix that. And somehow, through whatever he did, I was brought on as the parent-teacher coordinator at a Title I school where, by definition, 80% of the kids had to be on free or reduced lunch. And so I'm there. I find out really the reason why I'm there is because all of the students are black and all the faculty are white, and they need somebody to translate.
An interpreter.
An interpreter. They need somebody to tell the black parents we're not racist. Your child absolutely needed to be suspended. And in some of the instances that was true, but I did see that although a lot of them were not racist, they had prejudices, preconceived ideas about what people of color were like. And it helped me to see both worlds. It was my first introduction because, like you coming from Gary, Indiana, I was shielded from systemic racism because everybody was black. The mayor was black. The Congress people, the city council people were black. We were black. So I didn't see it until I went to college. But when I finally got old enough to realize why our schools didn't have books and why the pages were missing, I realized it was a tax-based issue, that the schools were funded by taxes and we were not paying taxes because most of us were in apartments. So there was no income tax, there was no property tax that was there that was going to help the school. So you escape that, you get through and you do the best you can, and then you get a scholarship. And you go into universities thinking that these people who are not athletes, who are there because their parents can afford it, are smarter than you. And then you realize you know as much, if not more than them, but they had money and you didn't. And then you have Ivy League schools where people like yourself have the intelligence to get in, but maybe didn't have the resources to get in. And so now you can't get this education because you can't afford it. And that education is given to people who can't afford it, who are not soaking up the education because they just pay their way. The entire system is broken. I want you to speak to that because you see it from a firsthand basis. And I remember when George Floyd died and they put their knee on his neck, one of the things I said is you just can't take your knee off of our physical neck. You've got to take your knee off of our economic necks. You have to take your knee off our educational necks. When you privatize prisons and people get paid to fill them and disproportionately filled with people of color when we're only 13% of the population, you mean to tell me that we're 90% of the problem? There's a lot broken. And you sit atop these boards and there's some parent listening right now, they're clapping saying, Pastor, you're knocking on my door, and I need answers from somebody who has a pen and a sword. I want you to talk to us about why that's an issue and what we can do as a people to overcome some of those barriers.
We as everyday citizens, we cannot unlive our history. I saw this quote from Maya Angelou the other day. We cannot unlive our history, but we can be courageous enough to face it. And so that we don't have to live it again.
Love it.
And so everybody has to find their form of activism. Muhammad Ali said that having a servant heart and service is the rent you pay to be on this earth. And everybody in your form of activism, whether you have a large audience such as yourself or you're a stay-at-home mom and you only have your children, not only, but you have your children as your sphere of influence. So in your spheres of influence, you have to do everything you can to eradicate and be courageous when it comes to racist moments. And that means if I'm a philanthropist and I am looking for things to fund, I want to make sure that I'm funding things that are going to lift people's lives, that I'm not giving to the same people that I always give to, and that I'm being conscious of the fact that this is a pet peeve of mine, that I'm investing in black organizations or in brown organizations, because we're not charities. It's an investment in our future. So when people think about, where they put their money, do you take your children to a daycare that doesn't accept vouchers? Because if it doesn't accept vouchers, that's a way of keeping poor people out of your daycare center. So if I take my children to a daycare center, they don't accept vouchers, I need to take my children to another daycare center. So in your own sphere of influence, you have to make sure that in your daily life, if you're at work and you look around and everybody looks like you, or everybody is white and you're the only person, you have to have courage to speak up in a very strategic way, so that your voice is elevated and people start to see how injustice really impacts bottom lines.
You've just impacted me. And I think you've just impacted people who are watching. You don't have to be powerful to be impactful.
You don't.
That you could do something as simple as saying, if this daycare doesn't accept vouchers, even if I can pay for my child to go, I remove them so that other people can have another opportunity. I think that's brilliant. I think that's ingenious. And I think it shows people that you can really start fine-tooth combing through your life to just find out small ways that you can be effective against the entire system.
And the key thing is continuing to have the will. We get tired. After the 1960s, the civil rights movement, we got lulled to sleep. We got to equality, but we didn't get to equity. I mean,
let's stop right there.
Two things,
let's
two
stop
different
right
things.
there. See, this is why you get paid the big bucks. See, I think you opened up a Pandora's box on that. So we got to equality.
Like under the eyes of the law, we are equal. If I enter a room with a white female, same age, same credentials, we are equal under the eyes of the law. But then equity, we're not treated equitably by nature of the color of my skin. In many cases, people perceive you differently. And that's what I say, it's back in your heart. And we have to do that self-work, everybody, of your own biases. We all have biases. We all stereotype. And that's everybody. Because even the people who are victims of systemic racism, we also have to deal with what's happening in our souls, what's happening in our hearts. Because that's how you get to, that's where you find your courage. Yeah. And that's where your hope comes from.
And resisting.
And hope keeps that will going.
Yet resisting the urge to become what you're fighting. Because you could very easily.
That's good.
Become
you must be a pastor.
What you fight. One of the things I know is for sure, and the Bible says, give and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. That's not my favorite part of that text. The second part says, shall men give unto your bosom. Some of you all have watched this message today, this conversation. And you thought, wow, that's audacious. It's something that I cannot do. I want to assure you, there is nothing that we talked about that you cannot do. The last thing I heard Dr. Burnett say was, we are planting a lot of seeds. And by that, she meant that our future would be secured, because seed, properly taken care of, always ensures a harvest. You can't just see that as it relates to conversations. You have to also see that as it relates to your economy. What you do with your money has grand potential and consequence. One of the things that you can do is to make sure that you understand that giving is better than saving. That the more you give, the more God gives to you. My grandmother used to say, you can't beat God's giving, no matter how hard you try. So they're going to put instructions on the bottom of the screen right now to show you exactly how you can give. And to those of you who are in our Lighthouse 2.0 community, thank you for using Givelify. For those of you all who watch us online, but you are local members, thank you for texting to give and using our TLHC app in the App Store. And those of you all who are a little old school to say, God says, bring the tithe to the storehouse, and you still have to bring it, we thank you as well. Any way you do it, we are appreciative. It's because of you that during this pandemic, we've been able to help over 120 homeless people to have 3 meals a day for the last 4 months. It's because of you that we've been able to feed 2,000 families every quarter, and we just the other day had another anti-hunger campaign, because we will never stop until everyone has something to eat. It's because of you that we're able to continue constructing our Dream Center, providing educational spaces for kids who may be less fortunate or people who just need a better environment. All of that happens because you're faithful. You being faithful allows us to be faithful to what God has called us to do. Thank you so much for your participation in our journey, and I hope that what we're doing is making a change in your life, because our relationship is about reciprocity. Thank you for your gifts, and God bless you, and I pray that God will multiply what you've released 1,000-fold. God bless you. And Mr. Knox, I can only imagine how incredible you must have been. I think our audience is going to figure it out, because women don't make the same mistakes men make, right? In order for you to be there, Dr. Burnett had to put some amazing thought, sleepless nights, multitude of counsel. Just real quickly, how did you get in that seat?
That's a great question, Pastor Henderson. I don't know how I got in this seat. I think I got fired at least 100 times up until this point, and I might get fired when we leave here today. So if I need a job, I might be back at the church looking for an opportunity. But I think in true transparency, President Pierce Burnett and I have been working together for about 16 years now. Wow. And so I came to President Pierce Burnett in a different capacity. I was complaining about something. And so the president said, well, do something about it. And so that was my call to action. And since then, we've been working together at universities to ensure that we provide a strong ecosystem for students to be successful. And we recognize that education is something that really changes the game for families, for individuals. And so it's been my great honor to work with President Pierce Burnett to help move institutions forward. And it's just icing on the cake that these institutions are historically black. I had the great privilege to attend Central State University, a sister HBCU in Ohio, Wilberforce, Ohio to be exact. And so the opportunity to be at another HBCU to work and to help deliver education and to build the ecosystem, I couldn't turn that down. So I'm always grateful to President Pierce Burnett for inviting me to Austin, Texas to be a part of this opportunity, because had it not been for President Pierce Burnett, I would not be in this seat.
You know, I'm a young aging African-American man like yourself, and Dr. Burnett, there's a mother watching now. And I don't know, we've been blessed. This mother could be in Ghana. She could be in Lagos or Accra. She could be in New York or Atlanta right now watching this. And she has a young son. And she wants to know, what do I need to do to ensure that my boy has a shot? What was it about Mr. Knox that made you take a liking to him, and what credentials and personality interests and what values are encapsulated in him that you could tell a mother, make sure your son has this in order to have a shot at this game?
This is a rare opportunity for me to really congratulate Wayne's mother and grandmothers, because they did a phenomenal job with him.
Black women.
Strong black women. And he has a tremendous work ethic, commitment, and a spirit of discernment. And the reason I believe we make such a good team is because I oftentimes make decisions with my heart. And when you're in a leadership position, that really is not best for the entity that you're making decisions for sometimes, because it's about this military wife in me, it's about the Navy, not always about the sailor. So sometimes I try to make all the decisions for the sailors, which may not be the best for the Navy. Mr. Knox makes decisions with his brilliant brain and wraps compassion around it as necessary. And that's why we make such a good team, because we keep each other on the straight and narrow. So what I would tell those mothers is that you pour into your child discipline, structure, and empowerment and passion, and you love them unconditionally. Because when you love them unconditionally, they begin to love themselves unconditionally. And that's really a reflection of what I've experienced in my journey with Mr. Knox. And I have fired him probably about 100 times. So we, just like any team, we have our ups and our downs. But the mission, the common mission, is to uplift these young people and to be able to pour into them what was poured into us. And that's a gift to be able to do that. And one correction that I want to make to Mr. Knox, he said that he came to Austin at my invitation. I had to drag him out of Chicago for him to join me, because we had I went back to school, as I was sharing earlier, and Mr. Knox went to Chicago to get his master's and was working there. And then I came to Austin, and you, as a leader, you need a team. Because my successes at the institution or in my career are not my successes. They're the village of people that I have around me. And his title is reflective of that. It's really the Chief Operating Officer, to be able to really get things done on the campus.
Yeah.
I'm the visionary. I'm out there. I have the vision and at the pleasure of my board. But then I need people that actually can make things happen. And that has been my experience thus far.
Yeah, I've heard it said this way, that every successful team needs a visionary that's not a facilitator and a facilitator that may not be a visionary. You need both of them. You also said some throughways that made me, there is something about your generation of women, which my mother is in. There's certain language that you all use that is cross-cultural. Discipline. My mother used to say that discipline is far cheaper than regret. She used to tell me that all the time, and about working hard and about getting it done. And you and I have a similar path, because I went to East Chicago Central High School, and I am from that area by way to here to Texas. And here you are coming from Chicago to Texas. So with that being said, I know what you saw. I know what you experienced. Nobody has to tell me anything else about you. If you spend any time in that city as an African American man, I know what applause you deserve for having made it out alive with sensibilities. The average age of the African American on the street that I grew up on, Ellsworth Place, was 25 when I grew up. I used to worry about making it to 25, whether or not I would live long enough to break the average. And I remember we had a party on the day that I broke the average. How did you not get caught up in drugs and in gangs? And if you did, how did you escape it? Because you are the quintessential American dream for an African American male who's trying to figure out, how do I make something out of myself when I don't have the tools that other counterparts have? What did you do? How did you do it? And bring some other African American along with your words on your progress.
So that's a really big question. Thank you for asking me that, Pastor Henderson. The chief thing is, I'm afraid of my mother. To this day, if my mother called me right now and said, "Be here, do this," I'm doing that right
no
there.
Doubt.
No doubt, no questions asked. I don't care how grown I think I am, how grown I am. That was the chief thing, my mother. And then I had praying grandmothers that really kept me on the straight and narrow. Now, I got into trouble, did things I should not have done, gone in a lot of places I should not have been, but it was that fear of being caught, one, then also the other fear was of disappointment. Because I know my mother and grandmother sacrificed so much for me to be able to be present in any space. And so it was me wanting to live up to their expectations, to do and to be better. Being from Cincinnati, very similar situation where African-American men, they were supposed to die young. And so I didn't want to be that person, because too many people in my family had died young for various reasons. And so wanting to get beyond that 23, 24 age range was my goal. And so what fueled me to move forward was, I didn't like people telling me what I could not do, because I didn't come from an impressive family, a family with prestige and money and things of that nature. We were a hardworking family that loved one another and loved people. And so for me, it was to do what folks said I could not do, to be able to have my name be currency, if you will, for my family members, so they can say, well, Wayne is my blah, 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 and therefore I need to do X, Y, and Z. That was my chief motivator. And then I also recognized that it was really important for me to give young men that same spark, if you will, to really dream beyond themselves. Don't get caught up in what society says you should be or what you cannot do, so on and so forth. So I committed myself to working really hard to be an example, to be a role model. And by no means am I perfect. It's more so that if I can do it, you definitely can do it, because you're a lot smarter, a lot braver, a lot whatever. And so that's been my chief goal, and still is my chief goal, still my chief guidance, if you will, to serve people, specifically young men, to give them a way out and a way forward. Because far too often we're told what we cannot do, what we cannot be.
For people who may not have had experiences like those of us as minorities in our country, and I expand that to Latino, to Native American, to all of marginalized groups. I'm going to share a story about one of the scariest moments I've had as an African American, and I want each of you to do the same, because I think that before people can see a struggle, they've got to experience it through your eyes. I was watching television the other day, and I was watching a young lady, a Caucasian young lady, suing her parents for monthly support, because she couldn't get them to accept her boyfriend. And so she wanted to stay with the boyfriend, and she sued her parents for $862 a month for support. And I thought, no way in the world, in Gwen Scott's house, are you going to take her to court and sue her for money and live to tell the story. It's just certain things that's just not going to happen in our community. And I looked at the young lady, and she had a $30,000 Cartier watch on, which I'm sure her parents purchased her. And I thought, is it possible that privilege has ruined more people than struggle?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I remember the most scariest moment of my life. I called myself, and he's going to know exactly what this is, Doctor, called myself being a GD. I was a gangster disciple growing up. I would never wear red. Everything I wore was blue. The Duke Blue Devils became my favorite team because they had a pitchfork, and that was the sign for the game. Now, I want to go on record for all the gang members. Ain't no sense of coming after me because I ain't one. You ain't got to come and get retribution or make it even because I wasn't tough then and I ain't tough now. But I called myself being a gang member. And so the day I found out that I wasn't, we were in a neighborhood where there was a rival game called the Latin Kings. Latin Kings were gold and black. And we were going to Great America that morning. My friend Leonard's mother was going to take us, and he has since been murdered. But his mother, Faye, was going to take us to Great America in the morning. And we stayed out all night because the goal was back then to not go to sleep, because if you could stay up all night, you was that guy. And we were leaving at 6 in the morning, so we stayed out all night. And we go down the street, and we walk past the rival gang members, and we shouting out, GD this and GD that, and we thought we were tough. 15 to 20 seconds later, they come around the corner in an old school Cadillac, shooting. You could see bullets ricocheting off of brick walls, and it was then that I found out that this was not the life that I wanted to live. I ran with everything in me. We all split up and went in different directions. I had a hat on my head that flew off. It was an all-white Chicago Bulls hat, because back then Michael Jordan was the GOAT, and still is. But still having the conversation as I'm coming back, and as I'm running, and there are LeBron James fans clearing their throat offset, but they're not in the chair, so they must not know what they're doing. And so we were running, and I ran, and the hat flew off my head. Running as fast as I could, doctor, and I got into the parking lot of Rallies. You remember Rallies and Checkers? And there the guys are in the parking lot with the guns in their lap. And I ran right into them, and I stopped running. And they didn't say anything. And I kept walking, and they didn't say anything. And I walked past them, and the thought was, they're getting ready to shoot me in my back. And nothing happened. I finally got to Leonard's house and realized that the hat that I had on my head was gone. And I thought they were looking for the guy with the hat on.
Okay.
And I use that as a story to tell people there is something that you're wearing that if you don't shed it, it'll get you killed. It'll keep you from getting to the promised land, if you will. That's a story that people who live in certain neighborhoods would never experience. So I told my story. I want you to enlighten our audience about a difficult moment in your life, whether it was professionally or as a child, where it was just hard to be black. Doctor, I'll start with you.
Well, mine is not as life-threatening, but it is about power, privilege, and struggle. And it was a moment that happened to me recently in Austin, and it shook me to realize that even though I'm the president of a university in a very prosperous city, I'm still black. And there was a race summit that was held in Austin, a summit on race, and I was a speaker because I'm the co-chair of Mayor Adler's Task Force on Institutional Racism and Systemic Inequities. So I had spoken and introduced a very powerful speaker that moment at the summit itself. And then that evening, they had Brian Stevenson and Mary Wright Edelman speaking. And then after that, they had Mary Wilson from the Supremes. So the VIPs could go to the after party, if you would. So that evening I go and I'm checking in at the table of where you check in to get your badge or whatever to be able to sit in the VIP section and then to attend the after party. And I give her my name and she gives me like a ticket to get into the event. So I say to her, I said, well, don't I need a badge or something to get to to the after party? And she looked down and she said, oh, I'm sorry, but you're not on the list. So I said, well, that's odd because I'm a speaker and I got the letter. So she said, I'm sorry, but you're not on the list. So in that moment, I kind of felt like this is odd. So I went on inside and I go to sit down in the VIP section and they stopped me and they said, you don't have, you had to have a certain thing on your badge. So I'm sitting down and I'm steaming now a little bit. I'm embarrassed, all those things that are happening in my mind. Your mind takes over, you start talking. So a very dear friend of mine who's of influence in Austin sends me a text and says that she'll meet me she's not coming to the lecture, so she'll meet me at the Mary Wilson event. So I write her back and I say, well, I'm not on the list, I can't get in. So she wrote back, that's ridiculous. You're university president, you spoke at the event. So she uses her influence to then contact the venue and for them to say that this is a grave mistake. So they come to find me, if you will, and then to give me my badge. Well, this time I got an attitude. I don't even want to go to the event. So I went home. And my sister, who was in the diversity and inclusion work, she really talked me off the limb. And because I was saying, well, maybe my staff didn't do something. She said, no. She said, you have to embrace that even though you are the president of the university, people still see you as a black person. And they still will use that power against you. And it's important for me to remember that even though I'm privileged, and that fuels me in my work, because even though I'm privileged, if you will, I still have to be recognized the fact that my skin color says something to people. So the reason it came full circle for me was the next morning I went to a business luncheon, and as I was leaving, I saw the wife of the then president of University of Texas. And she said, Colette, I was really surprised that I didn't see you at the event last night. And so I told her, I said, well, I wasn't on the list. And she said, that's odd. I wasn't on the list either, but they let me in. And that, for me, was really like a period to that moment. But I'm glad that happened to me because, like you said, that struggle, which is nowhere near the struggle for me is much larger than that. But for me, in that moment in my life, that made me realize that you still need to do a lot of work for your own people.
I love it. Because
you're the president of a university and you weren't on the list. And that's just like for me. And I remember, it's funny, I remember how it felt, what it looked like, the venue, everything. And I miss Brian Stevenson because I got an attitude and I left, so I blocked my own blessing. But that was just really a moment for me to remind me of the work that I need to be doing in my everyday life.
Mr. Knox.
Man, I feel like I'm the person speaking after the choir goes up to do their thing. I don't even know how to top either one of those stories, even engage in the conversation. I think, I really am struggling following those two great stories. I really think one of the biggest kind of life-changing moments for me, so growing up in Cincinnati, urban city, Cincinnati, when I was coming of age, had gone through a very tumultuous time when it came to race relations between the police and the black community specifically. And by the time, at this time when it reached its peak, there were 25 black men who had died from gunfire from a police officer. And so the city was kind of just bubbling up. And I had just started driving, and I was cool, seat back, music blasting, the whole cool kid thing at 16, driving. I don't know whose car it wasn't mine, but driving somebody's nice car. So I get stopped by the police for not doing anything other than being black while driving. And so that moment was frightening for me, but at the same time empowering for me, because I was able to navigate that conversation and move through that situation. But it called me to action, to be very intentional about my efforts to help shift city policy, if you will. So I went into public administration as a part of my journey in my career, and education is a part of that. And so that moment, that series, if you will, in my life has helped me to really be very intentional around ensuring that black men specifically have what they need to be successful, have the communication, critical competency skills, just to be able to navigate those kinds of spaces. Because not to say that if you're smart or you speak well, that won't happen to you. Yeah. It's less about that. It's more so you knowing how to manage the situation.
And it increases the odds.
Yeah.
It increases odds, and I think we have to admit that. I was recently pulled over by a police officer in an SUV that was rented. Mm-hmm. And he asked me, do you know why I pulled you over? I said, I don't. He said, you were speeding. You were going 31 into 25. Now, you know how we do. We think, you're going to be petty, but I was speeding. I guess if he says 31 into 25, that's over the limit. But this is how I addressed him. He said, license. My question was, are you going to allow me to reach for it? He said, yes, I am. So I knew that would put him on the defensive, because that's almost like an accusation. You think I'm one of those guys. Are you going to allow me to reach for it? He said, sure. He crossed his hands in a very subtle manner. I get the license out. I give it to him. He goes back. He runs it. He comes back and he says, I'm going to give you a warning. Have a great day. Now, if I would have been irate, it probably would have went different. And I don't want anybody watching to get upset to suggest that because you follow the law all the time, the law will serve you. But you do increase your odds when you have the critical competency skills to know that at a scene you have the right to ask for a supervisor, just like you do in a grocery store. To be able to know, and this is an open-ended question for the both of you all. There's a guy named Reverend Gregory Boyle, who is a Jesuit priest, who founded the largest gang member rehabilitation organization in the United States of America. It's called Homeboy Industries. I don't know why I came up with that name, but that's what it's called. And he said that Jesus took 4 things seriously: inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional loving kindness, and compassionate acceptance. Those are the 4 pillars that he uses to advance the bar of justice. Prior to you, we've had discussions with people who were younger and said that they had to admit that when people started looting and burning down Targets and gas stations and Wendy's, they didn't flinch because at least we had their attention. I want to talk about that controversy. Is our path forward etched in some violence and some critical thinking? Or is it Dr. King's path or Reverend Boyle's path? Is it the nonviolent, inclusive, unconditional loving kindness, compassionate acceptance route? Which one of those routes gets us to the mountaintop?
I think it's a both and, honestly. I think there's a need to get folks' attention. So I'm not saying a call to violence, anything of that nature, but you have to take action in order to make people respect who you are. So I'm one that boycotts economically. So if I feel that your business or what you stand for doesn't represent the black community, then I'm going to not support you with my dollars. So I think that's the call to action that a lot of black people need to think about now, is where do you spend your money? Because when you start to not spend in certain places, people respond very differently to you. And so I think it's that part of action, not necessarily violence, but action. Then the other part of being very intentional about understanding perspective. And so you listen with the intent to understand versus the intent to respond. And that's that inclusion piece for me, because I'm trying to understand your perspective before I offer my perspective. And I think we have to work collectively, it's not the work of black people or brown people alone. It's everyone's work to do that to do that in terms of listening intentionally, to really understand perspective and then to build common ground. As mentioned before, we're more alike than we are different. And so when we focus on what we share and care about, then we can get a lot further than focusing on those disparate things. Well, I like blue, you like red. Okay, there's colors in between those two. So let's focus. We like color, basically, at the bottom line. So it's really about finding those shared interests, then growing out versus trying to focus on why we're different. But at the same time, taking some kind of action. So for me, it's economics. I'm not going to spend there. And so whatever that action looks like for the individual, that must be a part of what we do to get to a common ground.
And, there's a book called White Rage by Carol Anderson, and she wrote it in response to the riots. And she wrote an op-ed and turned it into a book. And she said everybody's focusing on the riots and the violence for black people, burning down our own communities. And she said, but really what people need to peel back and look at what's causing that. And it's really white rage. It's where this back to, I love history, so it's back to the origins of our country, and what caused people to treat people inhumanely and the brutal institution of slavery. Like, what caused that? And then what stirred that? Why were we considered to be 3/5 of people? And then that eventually disrupts periodically into protests. And I don't support or, like Wayne said, no type of violence. But you have to have action, and it has to be organized, it has to be committed, and it has to be driven, and it has to be for purpose. So the marches, the entire Black Lives Matter movement, people can perceive it as violent. The data speaks for itself. Very few of the marches themselves. Of course, there's rioting and there's protesting. And then the protests, unfortunately, have turned into riots, which has turned into violence. That's unfortunate, but there's a reason that that's happening in the communities that it happens in. It disrupts. And until we get down to the root of the problem, it's like having a sore, and you just keep putting a Band-Aid on top of it. But you don't really get down to the root of the infection until you really start rooting out that infection. That's when the sore will begin to heal. And so we're in this space now where we put a Band-Aid over it, and then it disrupts, it erupts. We put a Band-Aid over it, erupts. So my hope is that we start really getting into the core of why communities, why there's this disruption, why there's this violence, and then continue to move towards focusing on the peaceful protests.
And I don't think, Dr. Burnett, and I love both of your answers, my personal perspective is that everybody already understands why. The same people that judged Black Lives Matter for burning down Target broke the windows of the Capitol, and burned down Black Wall Street, and burned down the Capitol building in the 1800s. Everybody knows why, but nobody understands why when they're guilty.
Right.
Go ahead.
Right. Yes. Austin, Texas. In 1928, Austin had a legal city plan called the 1928, some call it the 1928 Negro Plan. And if you were black and brown in Austin, you had to live in 78702 if you wanted your utilities cut on. So black people were black and brown people were displaced from across the city into one zip code, one area, and this was illegal. And the city really didn't invest a lot of money into that area. Now, Houston-Tillotson is in 78702. So as time progressed, Austin started to prosper and grow, and gentrification takes over, and the east side of Austin, which is where 78702 is, it becomes a desirable place to live. So I meet people on a daily basis that are new to Austin that have no idea why there's such frustration and racial strife in the city, because it's the only prospering city that has single-digit African American people living there. So Austin is working extremely hard to build this beloved community, and I really I'm blessed to be a part of that. So people don't understand the why, though. Okay. Like, how did all of this get baked into Austin, into the racial disparities, the health disparities? And it goes back to intentional decisions that people made to be bigoted and to be racist. So, but most people don't get that why. You know, they come to Austin, they just don't understand why the city has these challenges that it has. So it's back to my point about understanding the history of it, and then understanding the pain that there are people still living that experience that, and then their families experience that, and then their opportunities were snuffed out in many cases, and that's unfair. So you're right. People say, I didn't even live in Austin in that time. How does it affect me?
Right.
But it does affect you.
Yeah, and I think there's a new phrase that millennials are using. You know, they're tired of people understanding. They need to overstand, right? They need to really get it and see what's going on, because you know, you've got a generation of millennials, and I'm sure that as you do your work with African American men, they're distrusting of this system. We do all of this marching and all of this talking, and they like, did that do anything for Medgar Evers? Did that do anything for Dr. King? Did it do anything for Harry Belafonte? Did it do anything for Andrew Young? Did it do anything for John Lewis? And they have a different strategy, and it's a little more forceful, and it's got anger in it. I've been trying to do my best. I didn't do this publicly. I did this privately. I had a call with a few mentors. Now, I'll keep anybody's name out of this. I brought together several prominent preachers. I brought together just about all of the, not all, but most of the young prominent African-American civil rights activists of this day. I brought on a couple of CNN analysts and MSNBC analysts, and I had a Zoom, and I brought them all on, and I said, I'm not here because I'm trying to be all of your leaders. I'm not. Sean King is not going to go to my church, and Van Jones lives somewhere else. I just brought them all together. Bishop Jakes has his own church. Brought them all together, had this platform, and I said, I brought you all together because I want you to speak to one another, because I think that the solution of the future is a compromise of all of these mindsets. And that while they were burning down buildings in the 60s and 70s, Malcolm X was saying by any means necessary, and that was one part of the movement. Dr. King was in the Oval Office with Lyndon Johnson signing legislation. And I think that both were necessary to move the needle of justice forward so that the temperature could be one that we all could stand. I want you to speak to the necessity of equity of thought, that as Dr. Antipas Harris said it this way, he said, idealistic and politically motivated voices have replaced God's voice. It's what I call sanctified oppression. And he said, what has paralyzed and polarized our country is that some believe that a singular system should assume ultimate authority over all, and that diverse methods are somehow toxic and invalid. I think that's a powerful statement, because I'm pragmatic in the thought that it's going to be both and not either or, and all of the right isn't wrong, and all of the left isn't right. And I think that we're going to have to find this middle ground where we the people actually become we the people, and not the divided states of America, but the United States of America. Talk to the person who's watching right now, said, no, burn it down until we get change. And he's appearing to be strong. And what about the person who they say is weak? They're saying, no, let's compromise. Can we reason? Where is our true north? Where is that star? How do we come together really so that all of us can see that this solution is not monolithic, but it has to be multiple bullets in the chamber, if you will, if we're going to kill this demon that we're now facing?
So I think it's back. So I think that some of the leaders you mentioned, like King and X, towards the end of their journeys, we found more of them converging together versus diverging from one another because they recognized that it was a both and. And I think the key thing I want anyone listening to this show and hearing this message to really think about and ponder is the possibility of the both and what do I do to contribute to the both and then back to the point I mentioned earlier about listening with the intent to understand versus the intent to respond, because in that work of listening intently, you find that common ground, that commonality. Well, I might not agree to approach 1 through 4, but I agree with approach 5 through 10, and so we work from that vantage point. I think that's the key thing, is to really spend time thinking about the both and what I can bring to the table with my unique skill set to help advance this work, because there's not one path forward. While there may be different streets going in one destination, that's the way in which I feel we have to think about this body of work around equity and around justice and around working towards a common goal. One of the things I studied when I was in graduate school was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and so in that it's this undeniable statement that all of us, regardless of where our country of origin, our race, our gender, all the different parts and pieces, we have this common set of things that we need and we deserve as people. And so if we think about that universally and how we all have this shared space called the earth, we have to work collectively together, and it goes right back to that both and that we have to work together collectively to understand it. And then back to my point that I thought was really, really powerful for me, was listening with the intent to understand. Because while I might be from Cincinnati and you are from Gary, and a person may be from some part of China,
Cleveland.
You keep saying Cincinnati. She want Cleveland in there. Get it in
Cleveland,
there.
Cincinnati, Gary, and some other part of the country. We all care about the same thing at the end of the day.
That's true.
And so it's just a matter about how do we listen to the other person's voice and to give that person's voice space in the room. And because that person's voice is in the room does not take away from your voice being in the room. I think we've gotten to a place as a society where if my voice isn't the loudest voice, then there could be no voice. And that's no way forward, because then you have nothing but chaos and nothing but nothing really. And so it's really important that we really be intentional around giving everybody a space and a voice in the decision.
I like that.
Just very quickly, there's Dr. Peniel Joseph is a University of Texas scholar and a friend of mine, and he wrote a book called The Sword and the Shield, and it's about Malcolm X and Dr. King. And you pick who's the sword and who's the shield. But in the book, he clearly articulates how they complemented each other. And perhaps what happened with the civil rights movement would not even have happened if we didn't have
the sword and the shield.
Right, the sword and the shield. So you need the sword sometimes, and you need the shield sometimes. And it's not the sword in a violent way, because Malcolm X was not violent. He's painted as the American nightmare, and Dr. King is the American dream. But they actually respected each other highly from afar, and they only met each other in person one time. And their perceptions of each other early on was what they were reading in the newspaper about each other. Yeah. So they built, and so we as people, we also built these images around them, that King was perfect and that Malcolm X was a villain. But in reality, both of their styles is what catapulted us forward. And where they met was in Congress, at the Capitol. Malcolm X was there, and he was standing in the back of the room. They were both immaculately dressed, as they all both were, and just as powerful men, black men at that time, with a cause. So Dr. Malcolm X was standing in the back of the room, apparently, and as Dr. King left, they saw each other and actually greeted each other and had a brief conversation. So you think about that, these two iconic men with very different personalities, very different approaches, but both very necessary in getting the work, in getting this work done.
And I like that, because I think that what was supposed to happen, the propaganda that has always been instituted for people of color, say, for instance, the Willie Lynch documents that were designed to make us hate each other and to hate our own skin, which created what one writer calls an imposter syndrome that makes us feel like we don't belong, and we actually do. I am very impressed in my heart, very driven and purposeful about creating educational opportunities for people in lower income situations and people of different ethnicities. We have something that we're building right now as we speak. It should be done in May of 2021. It's called the Dream Center. And it's about 40,000 square foot of space with classes for technology and science, sports facilities, and it's built in an area where new facilities don't exist. The only thing new in the area where it is the newest wing of the Bush Airport. Everything else is run down and old. And one of my pillars of leadership is exposure. And so every time we picked a school that we rented or a building that we rented until we were able to get our own facility, I always attempted to rent those buildings in areas where we were not welcome. And let me tell you, they ran us out a lot of them. We only lasted 6 months in Kingwood before we had to get out of there. But let me tell you, it helped people who were going to our church, who were at or beneath the poverty line, to drive past $1 million homes every day. It was my only goal, so that they could see what they could be, even if they were not it at the time. And there are testimonies after testimonies after testimonies of people who have educations now that didn't have them then, who own their own homes now that didn't own them then. So I did my best, and I'm doing my best, to build this center where schools can be housed, and we've got a daycare and all this kind of stuff that the neighborhood needs. So that's my way of fighting. And you said something. I wish in the next few moments before we wrap up that we could build a 5 to 10 step plan, that we could give the people watching us 5 things that they could do on their level that would help shatter this ceiling that has been holding us down and to help push us forward. I know one, we can fight economically. You said, Dr. Burnett, earlier, and you just said it, about, hey, to the mom who has a child in daycare. If you go to a daycare where they don't accept vouchers, then remove your child from that daycare, because what you're doing is supporting an institution that doesn't give the other 8 people who are not like you an opportunity to have the same care as your child. So we've got ways that we can fight economically. We can edit this any way we need to speed it up, even if it takes you time to think about it. What is a plan that we could give the people right now? 5 things that if they did it, they would be contributing to the struggle, if you will, or contributing to the fight to help advance the causes of Black and brown people.
I'm biased, but
Okay.
for me, education is step one. The more we can educate our people in and out of the classroom, of course I'm biased to the classroom, the more equitable we can become, more equitable your opportunities are. Without that education, everything fields around it, like even your own health. You have to be educated on how to take care of your body. Your finances, you have to be educated on how to break generational poverty and to build individual wealth. So it's the education on the topic, and it's to take it, to take your life's journey in your own hands, because a lot of people think that an education, higher education, is not affordable. It really is. You have to work at it. You got to work hard at it.
So what are some of the ways that a higher education could be available to somebody who thinks that it isn't?
So you're depending on your socioeconomic level, you're eligible for federal dollars through Pell, which is not a loan; it's a scholarship. It's a grant, and there are all kinds of scholarships available, need-based and merit-based. But you have to work at it, and you have to find an institution where it's a fit for you. You got to find that space for your child, or if you are the person. And it's never too late to get an education. We have a very robust adult degree program, and I see people turn their lives around by going back and finishing that journey.
So Houston-Tillotson University is a place here in the state of Texas, in the city of Austin. If people are looking to get that second push to be able to further themselves, you're saying that they can reach out to you guys, and there are ways that people who cannot afford a higher education can actually get in that door.
Exactly. And we work really, really, your education is an investment in yourself. And it's an investment in your child. So you want to do that investment up front so that they can be anything they want to be. Like you are your mother's wildest dreams because of the path that you've taken. Same thing with Wayne. Same thing with me. So it's because those people made a way and created an opportunity for you to do it, be able to do the things to meet your calling in your life. So that, for me, that's really as a people, we have got to continue to educate ourselves so that we can take our own journeys into our own hands to get seats at these, I hate this analogy, but it's so everybody uses it, to get a seat at the table. You got to find the table. And then I can't remember who it was that said, I think it was Shirley Chisholm, that said she's going to bring her own chair up to the table if you don't give me a seat. And that comes from empowering ourselves.
So I love that. So we've got the education piece. Do you all have an online program at Houston-Tillotson?
Well, before COVID-19, we did not. We were not an online school. I'm very, very proud of my institution. Within 2 weeks, 2 weeks, but 10 weeks, but it's 2 weeks. Within 2 weeks, we lifted ourselves to fully online. We have been online since March of 2020. The times it's been just unreal. And so we are a touchy-feely school. We are an environment. I miss my students on campus. So we will return to on ground, but prayerfully if things work out the way that we believe they will. But we will now launch an online program, fully online, because we had one in the works all along. And that's because we see that there's an audience for that. And now we also see that we can do it, because crises push you into a zone where you realize just how strong you are. It's back to that conversation about resilience.
Yes, ma'am. So we got education. You said economy.
Yeah, if I could add one thing on what President Greg just mentioned. Oftentimes we, as a society, the American society specifically, liken low socioeconomic to intelligence, and that's not the case at all. People believe because they're poor, or because a person is poor, he or she can't learn as well, which is the greatest misnomer in the world. So that to say, it's really important that we, as creators of the ecosystem and of society, we don't perpetuate that narrative that if you are disadvantaged economically, you should not go to school. That people who are affluent or of wealth should go. It should be everyone going to school. And so it's up to the institutions, which you all pretty much commit to this. Once you get in the door, we'll help you find the dollars. We can speak very specifically to Houston-Tillotson. No matter how distressed your economic background is, if you go to school and do your work, we'll find money for you. There's scholarships abundantly out there to help cover your education. So the real message for me out of that is your job now is to go to school and get good grades. Once you do that, the rest we can figure those parts out. So I really want to impress upon individuals that don't think about your financial standing as whether or not you should or should not go to college. You should definitely go to college, and we'll help you find the resources to pay for your education. So back to the list of 5, economics, education, I really believe in what you said, Pastor, about exposure. And I think it's just one step further is authentic exposure, because it's easy to take young people to a place and to kind of pander to them, or to make them think that they could get this if they work hard, or if you speak well, all those different buzzwords that drive me crazy. But I think it's really about authentic exposure. So taking a person to a place where he or she is fully valued and invested in, that he or she can really grow to their full potential. Because there's a development theory about windows and mirrors. So to give a student a mirror give them a mirror to see themselves or herself in a person who's accomplished, and or a window to see their future. And so it's really important that we be very intentional and authentic in exposing students to an array of things, whether it be a person, an institution, a life opportunity. Those are really, really important from my perspective.
So right now, at the bottom of your screen, our team is going to put up 3 things that you can do, that you need to focus on. Number 1, it doesn't matter what age you are. You heard Dr. Burnett said she got her doctorate degree at 55 years old. It's never too late. It's never too late. Moses, if you're a Bible reader, he didn't become the emancipator of Israel until he was 40. Stayed in Pharaoh's house for 4 decades before his life got started. And then the next 40 years of his life is where his work really started. So now you're talking about an 80-year-old leader who is still blazing a trail. So you got to go get that education. And you may say, oh, they are teaching things that are not usable. Education is not about what you use. It's about the critical thinking skills that it develops within your mind so that you will know not just to think, but you will know what to think about. That's the purpose of education. The second thing they're going to show you is that you've got to work in the economic realm, economy. You got to know where you're spending your dollars. You have to know that there are communities that are successful where the dollar turns over 7 to 15 times. And you got to know in your community that by the 13th hour, the dollar has already left your community. And you may wonder why things look different. Most of the things that take place in your communities are tax-based. And if you spend your money in other areas, well, there goes your sale tax. If you buy your car in another city, there's the sale tax. If you live in another area and commute and come back, there's the property tax. So you got to understand that you have an economic power, no matter who you are, what color you are. Some people get this. I want you to get this down in your spirit, that you have an economy power and that you should be more of an economist than you are a spender. Make sure that you have something left for the people that you love. The Bible says a wise man provides an inheritance for his children's children. So you got to understand you've got education, you've got economy. And then Mr. Knox, who, by the way, my middle name is Dwayne, his name is Wayne, who would have thought that we would be that closely aligned, gave you your third E. You see it right at the bottom of your screen, exposure. Get away from the people you run with exclusively. My pastor used to say it this way: you got to run away if you're going to learn from those you run with. If you're the smartest person in your circle, you have a fool for a leader. You need to get in some rooms and be exposed to people who have conversations that make you feel stupid when the conversation is over. Because I guarantee you that if you get around people who are talking on a higher level, some things are taught. But my father used to say, other things are caught. You got to make sure you're in the right environment. You know, frogs need water to live, but they can't drink it. So what they do is they sit in it and they soak it up. If you sit around gossip, and if you sit around lies, and if you sit around negative behavior, then you will be a person who is surrounded with negativity. Thereby, that's the only thing that will come out. But if you replay this conversation over and over again, and if you don't believe that just because you watched it live that you got it, that you got to go back and look at it again and again, and if you are a Bible reader, the Bible says, thy word, he meditates on it both day and night, and he shall be like a tree, according to Psalms 1:1, that is planted by the rivers of water. That word planted is actually a Hebrew word that means transplanted, which means the tree used to be somewhere else, but it found itself placing its roots by the rivers of water. Sometimes you have to transplant yourself. Sometimes you may live in the hood, or you may live in the ghetto, or you may live in the lower side of town, but it doesn't mean that's where you have to spend your time. You can go find libraries and rooms and book clubs and different places where you can go and expose yourself. You know, we've got one lady on our staff. She had an opportunity to sit at a table with a king and a queen and some other famous people, and the shoes on her feet were $50. She sat at the table with people who had tens of thousands of dollars invested in their gowns, but her shoes were $50, and the dress she wore was donated to her. Because here's the other thing you need. You need a mentor and a sponsor. You need to impress somebody who has access to the room so that they don't mind bringing you in the room, and make sure that when they bring you in, you don't embarrass them. Make sure that you understand the language that is to be spoken at the king's table. Make sure that you can change your dialect and that you can use words. And by all means, don't go in talking, go in listening, because the listener is the person that people want to hear from. You've gotten a lot from these individuals who have spoken to you over these last few months, or few weeks, I should say. You've gotten a lot of information. What you do with it, there's the challenge. Did you know that you will spend 4 years of your life waiting in some sort of line? Maybe the grocery store, maybe the bank. You will spend 4 years of your life waiting. And the people who are successful are the people who have learned to utilize their delays properly. So maybe no one has let you in the door yet, and nobody's knocking your door down, and you haven't landed the job, and maybe the loan, the interest rate is higher than your friends. But I am a preacher. I will tell you, they that wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will walk and not be weary. They will run and not faint. I hope that you've enjoyed these series of discussions. I hope, as John Lewis said, that this was good trouble. I hope you were challenged. I hope that you feel that you can go forward. There are several things that you can do. I wrote a book called The Shift. There are many cues and clues inside of that book that can help you to realize it. You can go to Houston Tillotson University's website, and you just heard them say, if you'll get in the room, they'll find the money. And it's online, which means you don't have to leave your city or your state. You can do whatever you want to do, but you have to do it. I want to thank you, Dr. Burnett and Mr. Knox, for your time. I want to thank you for your conversation, but more importantly, thank you for allowing us the rare opportunity to hear you think.
It has truly been an honor. You rarely get to see the fruit from the trees, from the seeds that you plant. And you're planting a lot of seeds. Keep going.
Thank you so much. Mr. Knox?
Thank you, Pastor Henderson. It's just been an awesome experience to sit here and to hear from you and to learn from you. And I get to hang out with President Burnett all the time, so I'm grateful for her as well. So just thank you for letting me be here today. So.
Well, you haven't seen the last of these two individuals. Hopefully some of you all enrolling right now. Who wouldn't want to have a CEO and a COO that would drive all the way from Austin to Houston to have a conversation to the world? We love you. God bless you. And until the next time, we love you, and ain't nothing you can do about it. Listen, we have created a way for all of you all to connect with us online, whether you live in the city of Houston, out of the city of Houston, whether you're in another country. We've created a platform called Lighthouse 2.0. And it is nothing more than my way of connecting to you wherever you are. So right now they're getting ready to put a link up on the screen, and you're going to be able to go to that link, to that place, and say you want to be a part. Come check us out. We got a lot that we've given, and we got a lot more for you. I cannot wait to see you at 2.0.